Welcome to the 2023 Saltwater Sportsman National Seminar Series, filmed on location at the IGFA and brought to you by Bass Pro Shops and Mako Boats. You're about to learn from teams of some of the top saltwater fishing pros, and how you really glean the most from the Saltwater Sportsman Seminar Series is listen for the little subtleties, the small things that we are doing to put together a great catch or to get a few fish when times are tough out there. So let's get right down to it and start off with the Saltwater Sportsman National Seminar Series.
Coming to you from the IGFA in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, it's the Saltwater Sportsman National Seminar Series, brought to you by Bass Pro Shops and Mako Boats. Get ready, everybody. Here's George Poveromo.
Welcome to the Saltwater Sportsman National Seminar Series. We're at the IGFA filming this, and it is brought to you by Bass Pro Shops and Mako Boats. Hand crank deep dropping. It's one of my favorite pastimes, and it goes against the grain of having an electric reel and simply hitting a button to bring up these bottom oddities that could be anywhere from 500 feet to 1,100 feet. We're going to talk about maybe putting a sport back into that and hand crank these fish. A lot of people think it's nearly impossible, but we're here to show you otherwise. And to help define all this, from New Jersey, Cape May's Captain Tom Daffin. You got Alan Wenzel, the South Florida Keys Authority in the Bahamas, that does his fair share of deep dropping, and I think with electric reels, but we're going to get in that soon. And then we have, we call him the living legend because it's true. It's Captain Bouncer Smith, who pioneered a lot of tactics off of South Florida. So a lot of knowledge here. And I'm going to throw the first one to you, Bouncer, because lighter is king in this fishery here. You might be dropping weights 2, 3 or so pounds. You want a very light outfit that you can handle, a light rod with a lot of backbone, and light braid line, even dropping down to 12-pound test in some extremes, to cut through that water. It's really going light, and it's contradictory what many people think of fishing that deep. Give me a little rundown.
Well, the first thing I want to mention about that is that, you know, you said 12-pound, I use 15-pound. But 15-pound braid a lot of times has a tensile strength of about 30 pounds.
Exactly.
The interesting thing about braid, though, and this is really, really critical, is where braid gets in trouble is it does not have good knot strength. So you really, really have to tie meticulous knots. So I take this outfit here. It's a dual speed pen, and I put 15-pound braid on it. And with the dual speed, if I catch a fish and it's fighting hard, I can go into low gear and just crank away, and then the fish is eventually going to come up. If I don't get a bite, I'll go into high speed and I can wind it up really quick unless I use a big lead like you scared me with that 3-pounder. But quite frankly, when you're using 15-pound braid, where a guy would use 5 or 6 pounds on, say, 65-pound braid, I can use 1 pound with 15-pound braid. And the 15-pound braid cuts through the water better. It has more sensitivity. It feels the bites better because there's no bow to the line. And it'll bring up some really good fish.
And you talked about like the knot strength and all, but you look at that lighter braid too, and where you're pulling a lot of these fish out, it doesn't happen all the time, but most of the time, it's not like trying to horse a grouper out of a wreck. You don't necessarily have to fight a fish that terribly hard initially off that bottom. So you don't have to go as hard on that fish initially as you would an amberjack or a grouper off a wreck, where you got to go toe-to-toe and nearly a lockdown drag. So you could baby that system and not really tax it and then bring that fish up.
Very, very true.
But Tom, for the uninitiated, what do you look for? Where do you go to get them blue lines or your goldens? Tell me about some of the bottom that you're looking at or people should look at that could lead them to these fish.
So we mainly do our tile fishing in anywhere between 300 and 1,100 foot of water. When you're fishing canyon edges, you'll have a very steep drop off going into a more subtle flat and then another steep drop off. These are landslide off, all right,
okay,
which
sure.
exposes the bottom, which has clay bottom, and it exposes the clay.
And we're going to hold you at the clay because we got to go to a commercial break, and we're going to come right back. Saltwater Sportsman National Seminar Series, hand crank deep dropping. We're coming right back after a few commercials.
The Saltwater Sportsman National Seminar Series is brought to you by Simrad, Go with Simrad and go with confidence. Penn, let the battle begin. Ross, comprehensive oceanographic analysis for fishing. Mercury Outboards, go boldly. Engel, portable fridge freezers and high-performance coolers. George will be right back. Welcome back to the Saltwater Sportsman National Seminar Series from the IGFA in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Brought to you by Bass Pro Shops and Mako Boats. Let's get right back to George.
We're back. Hand crank deep drop in the Saltwater Sportsman National Seminar Series, filmed at the IGFA, brought to you by Mako Boats and Bass Pro Shops. Continue on with what they should be looking for bottom-wise.
So when we're fishing canyon walls, we're looking primarily where these small landslides were that expose the clay bottom. Golden tiles have a tendency to try to burrow in, and they have little burrows going along the canyon wall. And what they'll do is when they see a bait or a prey, they'll come out of those burrows to come attack it. Now, there's also areas between the canyons that we fish that are just basically expansive mud flats. And the type of bottom you want is something when you drop your weight down and it's going to get stuck in the mud and you're going to have to pop it loose. That's how you know that you're on good type of bottom. Or if you were really dialed in with your sonar, at least on mine, it shows a very narrow bandwidth when you hit the bottom. If it's an extended
bottom.
It is all soft bottom. If it's extended, it's a harder bottom, and sometimes you'll catch a few blue lines in that area, but you won't get a mix, or you won't get the goldens in that area.
Now, you talked about the soft bottom and the burrows. Is that mainly for the goldens? Do the blue lines take up a different, more rockier habitat, or is it all the same?
So the blue line's like a little bit pebblier bottom, a little bit harder bottom, but there also is areas where you can catch a mix of them. Like what we did, we can catch a mix of them in the shallows, like 300, 350 foot of water, 400 foot of water. I mean, if you got 3 hooks on, you might come up with 2 goldens in a blue line, or vice versa, and they will actually congregate together in some of those areas.
Alan, take us, again, you're in the Florida Keys a bunch and also in the Bahamas. What are we looking for that somebody could start getting in the action, 500 feet on out?
Right, so a lot of times we find our spots by dolphin fishing, believe it or not. So you always have your sonar on when you're out, even if you're dolphin fishing or whatever kind of fishing you're doing. And that's kind of where we've always targeted. We've seen these big holes that there was some sort of life around it, be it the baits running around. And more in Isla Morada area, we don't really get the soft bottom, right? We're more rocky bottom, so we have a tendency to hit more blue line tiles, as well as your rosies and some other types of species, but not, you have to either go further up north to the Key Largo area or further west to the Key West area to get the goldens.
Now, Bouncer, when you're working these tile fish and you're over the right bottom and they colonize, in other words, you could be drifting over a big stretch and not get anything, but once you do get one, do they tend to really congregate in these zones? What's your take on that? You've been doing a lot of this out of Miami.
Well, there's a couple of things that enter into it. First of all, they do drift to different depths. I don't know whether it's the water temperature down there or what, but they do change depths. For instance, you may find a tile fish one trip in 580 feet of water. The next trip, you might have to go as deep as 720 to hit them. And off of Miami, as you know, it's a pretty quick change to go from 580 to 720. In other places, that would be miles and miles. But the bottom line is, first you had to find the depth that they're congregating in. And then when you do hit one, always hit your man overboard or make a waypoint so you can go back to it again. And then with the golden tile fish, we find if your bait is laying down near the bottom, you'll do better than if it's on a 3-hook rig coming up off the bottom, because they do burrow in the bottom. They literally sit there with their head sticking out of the mud and waiting for a food to come by, and then they run out and grab it.
When you have the rig and you have your sinker at the bottom and you have your hooks up the rig, you're dragging that sinker on the bottom, basically, are you not, for the goldens?
You'll catch a lot of your biggest ones if you stick it in the mud and let it sit there for a minute. I use a 3-way swivel, an appropriate lead, a 10-foot leader with a 9.0 VMC circle hook on it. And then I bait that with a kingfish belly or a bonita belly, a whole squid, or a butterfly goggle eye, not a live goggle eye, but a butterfly bait is when you fillet it from the tail to the head and leave the fillets attached to the head.
Gotcha. And what we're going to do is we're going to butterfly out to a commercial break. We're going to come right back to this. You're watching the Saltwater Sportsman National Seminar Series, filmed on location at the IGFA. We're coming right back.
The Saltwater Sportsman National Seminar Series is brought to you by Rapala, your best shot at a world record. Suffix, always use the best line. VNC, your expert in hooks. Williamson Lures for the pelagic playground. Starbright, blending technology with performance since 1973. George will be right back. Welcome back to the Saltwater Sportsman National Seminar Series from the IGFA in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Brought to you by Bass Pro Shops and Mako Boats. Let's get right back to George.
We're back to the topic at hand crank deep dropping. The Saltwater Sportsman National Seminar Series, filmed on location at the IGFA, brought to you by Bass Pro Shops and Mako Boats. Bouncer Smith, you were going through the baits, just discussed, butterflying it where you take the backbone out. And again, correct me if I'm wrong, the tougher baits, the better, because you put bonita or you put kingfish, you've got that skin. But then squid is also good, but squid could get knocked off a lot faster. Which do you mix and match, or give me an idea? Are you fishing one single bait?
I fish a single bait, single hook. Remember, the golden tiles are limited of one per person. So a chicken rig with 2 or 3 of them, one guy might catch the whole boat's limit of fish. But all that bait talk being said, there's nothing better than dropping a lure down there. You and I are both artificial avid people. So dropping a vertical jig makes for a lot of fun. And when we're tile fishing, and there's a multitude of other critters down there, we'll usually put 2 hooks at the top and at least 1 hook at the bottom. And a little trick that we use frequently is on that single hook on the bottom, we cheat and we put a squid head on there. I do want to mention one other thing when we're on jigs. This lure right here goes down fast, comes up easy, and is the easiest way to fish. But if you're having a hard time getting bites, you take a wide profile lure like this, and it's flat on one side, it's got a double taper on the other side, and with this bait, you can hit the bottom. It takes a little longer, it goes down pretty good, but when it hits the bottom and you just lift it 5 or 6 feet, and when it goes back down, it goes like this.
Exactly.
And it's really, really good for aggravating the fish into biting.
Well, I don't want to get you too agitated, so I'm going to go over back to Tom. And then when you're fishing your rigs with a bait rig, do you do a double hook, a single hook? And then how does the jigging apply with your fishing up there?
So when we're bait rigging, we do use a 3-hook chicken rig, keeping the baits fairly tight to each other, maybe 14, 16 inches apart. In New Jersey, we're allowed 8 Goldens per person, and the charter boats are allowed 5 Blue Lines a person. So it's okay to catch multiple fish at a time. And as far as like the baits go, if you're in a big fish area, I'm a very big advocate of big baits. Some of the best baits.
What do you define as a big bait?
Long strips of different types of fish. Like I'm a big advocate of salmon. I like using salmon for bait. Sometimes, 10, 12-inch long strips. You can use, maybe like 8-inch long mantled squid for it. Also, another really good one, if you're fishing deep, if you're catching some rosefish mixed in, which in some of our areas we tend to catch some rosefish as well. If you get a smaller one, a butterflied rosefish is deadly on big Goldens.
And then, Tom, we were up there with mixing, and we were going side by side. You were fishing baits, and we were switching off and doing the flutter jig and dropping those Williamson jigs.
Yes, sir.
And it was almost even money between the two.
Yep.
And the sport being able to drop those things down and then nail them on those jigs is a pretty cool feat. Okay, we're sitting here, we're talking tilefish mostly. But again, what about, I want you to be thinking about the rosies, and then also you get what I like to call the Deepwater oddities. You have the barrelfish, you've got the queen snapper. So when we come back from a commercial break, I want to get you dialed into what are you looking for in terms of different bottomers, all the same. But hold that thought. We'll be right back. We'll hit a few commercials for the Saltwater Sportsman National Seminar Series, and we'll be right back to hand crank deep dropping. Hang in there.
The Saltwater Sportsman National Seminar Series is brought to you by Atlas tracks, satellite tracking of recreational pleasure boats, supply vessels, and fishing fleets. Columbia Sportswear, stay cool and protected while fishing. JL Audio, ahead of the curve. ACR, building survival products since 1956. Florida Keys and Key West, visit flakeys.com. George will be right back. Welcome back to the Saltwater Sportsman National Seminar Series from the IGFA in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Brought to you by Bass Pro Shops and Mako Boats. Let's get right back to George.
You're watching the Saltwater Sportsman National Seminar Series, hand crank deep dropping. I'm going back to Captain Alan Wenzel, and a lot of what we were discussing so far has been on the tilefish, blue lines, goldens. Now, what about the Deepwater oddities we tend to see off of our area in the Florida Keys? You have queen snapper, you've got your barrelfish. Are you looking for any kind of different bottom, or are you doing this all in the same area and looking for that one lucky shot to convert one of those fish over?
Usually they're in different spots, but a lot of it is, still rocky area, almost similar to still what you would find on the reef, but much shallower profile. If there's bait down there, there's going to be some kind of fish, whether it is the barrel. We caught a couple barrels last summer in about 700 feet of water, which we thought we were going to get tiles, right? But no, all of a sudden these barrel fish come up, and we caught 2 or 3 of them on the same, the same drops with different rods running. But that's usually what we find. But again, we're running more multi-rigs, right? We 3 runs, 3 hooks. We're using thicker braid because of course.
What are you defining thicker?
Thicker, we're like in a 30 to 40 pound braid.
But you're using electric.
Well, we are using electrics, but the principles are really the same.
Yeah.
The only difference is that you don't have to hand crank up. But in the same area, we're running, the bigger thing, the deeper that we go, it's going back to lights too, right?
Sure, yeah.
We have to have lights. But the thing other that we find, because we put the light up a little higher.
What's higher? Define that.
A couple, 3 or 4 feet higher than the rig itself. But we're also using glow beads on a lot of the rigs. So usually they're charged up enough to where they can still see them. And that's where we tend to get the bigger fish.
Glow beads, what, being on the eye of the hook?
On the eye of the hook, yes.
Understood. And also the hump down there too.
Yes.
Where in relationship on the hump, if you wanted to try this, obviously not on the hump, but is there, I know there's some areas around there that tend to produce queen snapper and all that. Yeah. You're going to reveal any of that?
Yeah, on the outer side, we've caught some nice queens on there, the big eyes, rosy. So it's all around that area. Again, that's where the fish is. They're all, that's part of the bait fish, or whenever there's bait fish, always there's bigger fish.
Gotcha. Balancer, very crucial to this type of fishing is controlling, say, the drift over bottom. I know certain times that you could just tend to drift over certain types of bottom, but as you get into certain parts of the Keys or what have you, and you see some pronounced bottom that you want to drop on, it becomes more important to make sure that that boat remains more straight up and down on these smaller pieces of structure. How crucial is it to stem the current, or some of the tricks involved to make sure that that jig or the baits remain where they need to be at the longest in the bottom for soak time?
Well, that's one of the important things in the Miami area up to Palm Beach, especially, well, basically from north to Key Largo north, is we get very, very fast currents. So our deep dropping is determined by what the Gulf Stream's doing. Where in the Keys, you could probably almost go bottom fishing almost any time you want. In Miami, you go out to go sail fishing, you say, oh, there's no current. That's the day you want to go bottom fishing. Right. And you go out there and you say, well, the current's doing 5 knots. Well, that's the day that you
go sail
generally,
fishing.
but here's an important trick. If you're going for golden tiles, the more like a sailfish day is, the better the golden tiles bite. An easterly wind seems to turn them on.
Really?
A
So
little
the
bit
same
of current.
conditions of sailfish. You and I had gone out one day in the nastiest conditions of
It was
sailfishing.
perfect conditions.
We cranked them all, limited out.
Yes, we did. We had Sue Cocking and yourself and I think Steve. We had a good bunch of people, but we went out golden tile fishing, and it was perfect sailfish conditions. Northeast wind, good strong north current, and we had really good fishing. Well, part of that is because when you have a good current, you drop down, you're fishing the right depth of water. but you keep moving to new locations all the time till you find a lot of fish.
And wouldn't that northeast wind that's opposing the current maybe keep that drift a little more under control, not racing away too?
It does slow down your drift, most definitely. And we got to remember, a lot of times that current is only right on the surface. So if you have that light braid and you cut through that surface current, you'll find that you can still hold on a spot by driving into the current with the boat. It's much like when we swordfish. We're driving against the current all day long. And it's the same when we're vertical jigging or deep dropping in the deep water.
You know, I could sit and talk about this all day long, but unfortunately, they waived us. They wrapped this thing up. So I want to thank Captain Tom Daffin, Captain Alan Wenzel, Captain Bouncer Smith for the session on hand crank deep dropping. It's an easy way to get into it, and you don't have to spend a lot of money on fancy electric reels. Give it a try, and you'll take home some really good eats. That's the Saltwater Sportsman National Seminar Series. We'll be right back from the IGFA with another topic. There you have it. The Saltwater Sportsman National Seminar Series will be right back next week with a totally different episode. If you want a chance to win our Super Grand Prize Mako 17 Pro Skiff Center console, powered by Mercury Outboard, enter the drawing at nationalseminarseries.com. One lucky winner will take home this beautiful Mako boat. Best of luck.